Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for what is the last of our week of sessions for you. My name's Jane Malcolm, and I'm responsible for external and corporate affairs at the SRA. It's about 2 years now since we introduced our transparency rules, and what we were really trying to do was to make sure that firms were providing clearer information about price, services, protections to the public for people who are looking to find the help they need. In this session, we're going to be looking at how it's going so far, what we asked you to do, and how firms and the public have responded to those changes. And we're also going to look at some of the opportunities for firms in terms of promoting your business, attracting new business. And there's going to be some practical tips around compliance. Finally, we're going to have a look ahead at some of the future work in this area, particularly around what we call quality indicators for consumers. So there's lots to cover here. But we really want this session to be as interactive as possible. You can see there's a link below this broadcast which you can click on and submit questions. Although you can identify yourself when asking, you can submit questions anonymously as well. And we'll do our best to get through those questions by the end of the session. So today, I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by a range of my expert SRA colleagues, Natalie, Arvinda, Paul and Chris. We're going to be starting the session looking at the impact of our rule changes in this area. And I'm going to hand over to Natalie, who's a policy manager here at the SRA. She's responsible for a whole range of areas, including the transparency rules and the 5-year evaluation of our regulatory reform programme. So we're keeping you busy then, Natalie. Prior to joining us, Natalie was head of policy at the Bar Council. Thanks, Natalie.
Okay, so I'm just going to start by having a quick recap on what the rules are and why we put them in place. So you may recall that the CMA legal market study in 2016 found that the legal market wasn't working particularly well for consumers. And we did quite a lot of research before we put in place the transparency rules. And that revealed that people really want to be able to shop around and compare price and service information, but that few firms were actually publishing price information or service information on their website. So we decided to put this into rules in 7 key areas of law. So this slide essentially just sort of sets out an overview of what we've done. So firms need to publish price and descriptions of key services, details of their complaints procedure, including how to complain to the Legal Ombudsman and to the SRA. We've also developed a clickable logo for use for firms, which essentially shows the protections that are conferred upon consumers by using a regulated firm. And we've launched a digital register as well, which is a definitive source of all the information that people will need about law firms and people regulated by us. So moving on, we've just published the first 1-year evaluation of our transparency rules. So I'm just going to pick out a few of the interesting findings that we've seen coming through from that. As you can see from the slide, it's still quite early days, but the evaluation has found, encouragingly, that a lot of people are looking at websites, first of all, and are finding the information that they're using on there to be very useful. It's helping to dispel the myths that solicitors are too expensive. As you can see from the slide, only 10% of consumers thought that solicitors were an unaffordable option after looking at prices on websites. This, of course, isn't all about price. A lot of it is also about other types of information that consumers use. And we know that one of the most important things that they find useful is service information. And the vast majority of people who are looking at information about the description of services on offer by particular law firms, things like biographies of staff members, found it incredibly useful. I will just finish by with a top tip, which is just a reminder to use plain English on websites. So one of the findings that did come through through the evaluation was that there was still a little bit too much legal jargon being used. So I think it's just good to sort of go away and think about how information might be framed on a website.
Thanks very much, Natalie, and I'm sure we'll hear more from you as questions come in. So do please start getting some questions in, everybody. But we also asked everyone to send in questions in advance. And one of the ones that caught my attention was from a compliance officer who wanted to know if people were interested in whether their firm was regulated or not. And we all know that there's a growing unregulated legal advice sector out there. So I think it's a really key question. Natalie, do you want to give us a little bit of information on that?
Sure. So this is actually something that we looked at during the course of the evaluation. And we did find that a sizable amount of people, I think almost half of the people that we surveyed, thought that all legal service providers were regulated. Quite a few people didn't really know who the regulator was or how to make a report to their regulator. So I think it's just really important to emphasise that this is where the clickable logo can really help regulated firms differentiate themselves from the unregulated providers who won't be able to display that sort of logo. And for the consumer, it's also an opportunity for them to be able to click through and understand a little bit more about the protections that are on offer from regulated firms as well.
Thanks very much, Natalie. And of course, we provide lots of information on our website as well for people around consumer protections, insurance, redress, and also the work that the Legal Ombudsman does so that people can find out how that fits together. Thanks very much. So I'm going to hand over to Arvinder, who's a researcher in our research and analysis team. And Arvinder's currently leading on all the research around the evaluation of our regulatory reform programme, which of course goes much more widely than this. Over to you, Arvinder.
Thank you, Jane. So continue with the research findings. We asked consumers what else they wanted to see in terms of information, and they told us that they really value the feedback on law firm websites, and they're actually much more likely to use these reviews than reviews on digital comparison tools. Consumers told us that they also want to see customer reviews and testimonials alongside data such as success rates and typical case scenarios. And within our research, we found that actually only a minority of law firms, around 22%, say they have the functionality on their websites for consumers to leave reviews or ratings. And 7% of firms told us that they actually plan to add this functionality to their websites. So moving on, we will now look at what law firms are saying about these reforms. It's very encouraging. Overall, about 68% of firms said they were publishing the required information on price and service in the regulated in the required areas, and this represents a significant change. As prior to 2018, we found only 18% of firms were publishing any price information online. Also, really encouragingly, we found that 90% of firms said they're now displaying the SRA clickable logo, and about 80% were publishing the complaints procedures online. So we can see that it's not just in the areas of price and service where information is becoming ever more available now. And firms told us that the implementation of the rules hasn't created too much significant cost for firms, with the majority saying that the costs were either low or unchanged. What we did find was that law firms actually tend to rate the importance of their websites for consumers' decision making much lower than consumers do. Actually, firms, very few of them believe that a high proportion of their clients actually use the website before instructing, whereas consumers, about 67% of consumers said that they actually do look at websites. And this might be because when we asked law firms in the follow-up research interviews, most firms said they didn't actually measure the benefits of their websites, or they didn't look at conversion rates or linking the consumer usage of the website to inbound inquiries. Encouragingly, we did find that 1/3 of law firms said that they are voluntarily publishing prices on wider legal services not covered by the rules. And at a time when the pandemic is potentially creating challenging environment for many businesses, and the public, as we all know, are now increasingly shopping online, nearly 1/3 of law firms said that they would proactively recommend publishing more information online because it's good for business. And so moving on, obviously the firms we asked them about the benefits, but we also asked them about challenges. And the main challenge seems to be information presentation, both on the website and offline. And key issues were things like not knowing how much information to provide. And some firms said they found it difficult to display prices because matters can be complex and variable. But what we do know is that consumers do wish to know the likely cost of a service. And shortly we will talk about the support that's available on our website and in terms of guidance, case studies and templates that could help firms. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Arvinder, and some great points there, particularly about how important it is that people can find the information they're looking for at a time when everyone is doing so much work remotely and so much retail therapy online. We've had a question in on a really key area of this. We've already touched on the value of the clickable logo. And we have a question in asking us about whether there's a risk that people may be able to clone or imitate the clickable logo to try and dupe people that they're regulated. Natalie, I wonder if that's one you'd like to pick up, please.
Yes, sure. So this is something that we routinely check on, and we do keep an eye on it in collaboration with our logo partner, Yoshki, on a regular basis. And we've not actually identified any fraudulent use of the logo at all so far. So I think that's very positive.
Thanks, Natalie. That's good to hear. Thank you. We've had another question in advance, but it's one that I think we've all heard quite a bit, and colleagues will recall that we've had several sessions on better information over the years at our compliance conference when we've been able to actually talk directly with all of you. Very different this year, of course, but a regular question has been, how can you meet the price transparency rules when every case is different? We've used a range of fees, hourly rates, and some examples. Is that enough? Arvinder, what do you think?
Yeah, that is sufficient in order to meet the rules, because the rules are really about making sure that consumers have got the information they need to make an informed choice, and part of that is understanding what the cost might be. So this could take the form of various pricing models. So we could, the firm could have range of costs, typical costs or average cost of the service. And I would really encourage firms to take a look at our website, because we have got guidance on there with templates for different areas of law, as well as practical tips on there as well.
That's great, Arvinder. Thank you very much. And keep those questions coming, everybody. And now I'm going to hand over to Paul O'Hara, who's going to talk about our approach to enforcement in this area. Good practice, but also some common areas where we've seen firms fall short. Paul's been a regulatory manager in our thematic team for about 5 years now. In addition to helping to carry out elements of our transparency work, the team more broadly also looks at thematic risks across the legal profession. And I'm sure as compliance officers, you'll have seen lots of those reports. So over to you now, Paul.
Thanks, Jane. Good afternoon, everybody. Just thought it would be a good idea to explain what we've been doing and give you an overview of some key areas and hopefully a few tips. So essentially, we want to see you get this right so that consumers and small businesses have all the information that they will need to make an informed choice. To check how firms are doing, we've been carrying out web sweeps and engaging with firms. But what is a web sweep? Well, we've been proactively reviewing hundreds of firm websites throughout 2020. We refer to this as a web sweep, and this literally means visiting each website to check whether all the relevant information is available. This includes information about services, costs and complaints, as well as the clickable logo. We've also recently begun engaging with firms to ask if they're compliant with the rules, but more on this later. Overall, we tend to find that most firms have taken steps to comply with our rules and that the absolute levels of non-compliance is very low. But let's have a look at some more specific areas and what we expect. So first up, the charging basis. Essentially, are you providing information to consumers to enable them
Jane, you're on mute.
I can't see the slide.
So I think Paul, we might have slightly lost him, but he was talking about what is a web sweep. Well, we've been proactively reviewing hundreds of firm websites throughout 2020. Refer to this as a web sweep, and that literally means visiting each website to check whether all the relevant information is available. And that also includes the clickable logo, service and cost information, and the required complaints information. We've also recently begun engaging with firms to ask if they are compliant with the rules, and we've got more on this later. Overall, we tend to find that most firms have taken steps to comply with our rules, and that the absolute levels of non-compliance is very low. And here we can have a look at some of the specific areas and what we expect. So we've got things like charging basis. So essentially, you're providing information to essentially, you're providing enough information to consumers to enable them to make an informed choice. So things like, have you explained whether you're offering a fixed fee or work in an hourly basis? And not only do we expect this information to be made available, but recent literature has shown that it helps to generate work. A quarter of all our complaints dealt with by the legal ombudsman actually relate to cost. So if you're clear about the cost at the outset, that can help avoid confusion and complaints down the line. Credentials, publishing the qualifications and experience of anyone carrying out the work and of their supervisors. So this, after all, is an opportunity for you to showcase the skills and experience that you and your staff have, and this will help to distinguish between you and the competition. Information on individual teams does not need to be on the same page as the price information. For instance, you may already have this within wider biographies, or you might have a who's who or about a section within your site. Disbursements. It's really important to highlight the likely disbursements and their costs, such as is there a possibility that this may change? Ultimately, potential clients want to know how much it will cost, and clear and transparent information about disbursements will help them make sensible choices. VAT.
Sorry, would you like me to take over? Sorry, I've just turned back.
Yeah, we've got you back, Paul. Thank you very much.
Yeah, really sorry about that, folks. So as Alinda was saying, VAT, be open and transparent about VAT. This means either providing a specific breakdown of any additional sum added on for VAT, so for example, £20, or alternatively, an indication of the current VAT level, so that would obviously be 20%. Next up is complaints. So make sure you have all the required information. So that includes your complaints process and contact details for both the legal ombudsman and us. You should also explain how long clients have to make a complaint to the legal ombudsman, so that's 6 years. Now, these requirements are designed to help consumers understand more about the service they can expect to receive. So basically, it's location, location, location. The information should be available in a clear and prominent place. And while each website will be different, we do not want to see any information hidden away in areas that are difficult to locate. Having carried out my own fair share of web sweeps and become quite good at anticipating where firms may store information, we still receive complaints from firms who tell us that our web sweep is inaccurate. And all I would say is, if I'm struggling to find the information from the exercise, how easy might it be for a consumer? The next slide. So finally, you've done the hard yards and you put in all the effort. Some publishing tips. Do your links actually work? Is the information actually published on your website? Now, I've checked a few websites before, and we've often found that there's page not found, so make sure you've just got that in place. Also, if more than one individual has been responsible for producing the information on your website, just make sure the information is up to the same standard. I know quite often that firms will have different web pages for each area, and it's just important to check that if that work has been done by two different people, that they're both up to date and ready to go. Another thing to remember, also consider what areas you are publicising. So I'll regularly see websites which contain a brief reference to a specific area of work. So for example, we also carry out debt collection work. Please contact our office to discuss this further. Now, if you publish that you work in an area in passing, we still expect to see all of the relevant information provided. But what's next? Well, as you can see, this area remains really important to us, and our commitment to carry out ongoing engagement reflects that. We're currently writing to firms and asking them to confirm whether they are compliant with our transparency rules. We'll be doing this on a rolling basis from July 2020 to March 2021, and we'll reach 2,000 firms. Not only does this allow us to check that firms are getting it right, but it also makes sure that there's a level playing field out there, because I think we know this takes time, money, and effort to get right, and we want to make sure that everyone is putting in the same effort. So far, we've engaged with 980 firms throughout the profession, including everyone from sole practitioners to large city firms. So this exercise will take you about 10 minutes, and all we want to know is who you are, your firm, the areas of work your firm carry out, and whether you have relevant cost and service information available for each area, and also whether you have appropriate information about your complaints process. There's no trick questions, and help is on hand from our professional ethics team if you want to discuss anything further. Now, naturally, we will be checking responses, and where we discover issues or problems that are brought to our attention by firms, we may engage further and, where necessary, take enforcement action. So given the large number of firms we'll be contacting, we might be speaking to your firm. Now, as compliance officers, I don't need to remind you to make sure that we hold accurate contact details for you, but I know that this is sometimes a sticking point, so just make sure they're up to date. So the next slide, and it's the last one from me. As mentioned at various points throughout, guidance and frequently asked questions are available on a host of topics, and there's some really good templates which we've given out to other firms. We also have a dedicated inbox for queries, and the usual help is on offer from our professional ethics helpline. So thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Paul, and thanks everybody for your patience with the obvious technical problems there, but we got there, and thank you to our vendor for stepping in when we lost Paul for a wee while. And it's given everyone a chance to send us lots of questions, I'm pleased to say. So I've got 3 coming in. So firstly, and this is one I'm really interested in, Paul, you mentioned making sure that the information you provide is in a prominent place on the website. What's prominent enough, do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a common question that we get from a lot of firms, and obviously it's been intentionally not defined, and it's left to the discretion of the firms, because we appreciate there's lots of different websites out there and all the businesses are different. The one piece of information that we have provided through the guidance is just to make sure that it's signposted and easy to find. So for me, I think if I was looking at this, I'd just ask people to put yourself in the consumer shoes and think about where is it going to be easiest for the people to find this information.
That's great. Thanks, Paul. And that makes a lot of sense. I've got a question from Alex, who's asking about the proportion of firms that have been subjected to a web sweep, and do we provide feedback following the web sweep? I think you picked some of that up in your presentation, Paul, but do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think we've been contacting, over the course of the next couple of weeks, we'll be contacting around 2,000 firms. There are a range of firms, everybody from sole practitioners all the way through to the city firms. And we deal with people as and when they email us and things. So if people want to get in contact, we're more than happy to provide feedback.
And in terms of the proportion point, we regulate a little bit under 10,500 firms. So that gives you a feel for what we're looking at in the timeline that Paul's outlined. And of course, we'll be doing further work on this further down the line. Thanks very much for that one, Paul. I've also got a follow-up question on the clickable logo, and I'm going to take that now while it's fresh in everybody's mind. So Paul has asked us whether it's possible to use the logo on marketing material or email footers. I've certainly had this question lots of times in the past, and of course the difficulty is it's a digital logo. It only gives people information about the protections that they get from using a regulated firm if they click on it, which doesn't really work in a printed documentation. But it could be used more widely elsewhere, and I'm going to ask Natalie to pick that up. And we've got a second part of that question is there material we can share with firms and local law societies on the difference between regulated and non-regulated firms, so that you can promote the difference, the benefits of using a regulated firm? Natalie.
So we do have resources that we can share through the post-event materials. I'd also just flag that we've done quite a lot of social media engagement on this as well, just to really emphasise the difference between regulated and unregulated providers. So that's partly through social media campaigns. I think also through the Legal Choices website that we have for consumers, it does go into a lot of detail around the different types of providers and what that actually means for them. But so far as the resources are concerned, we can certainly follow up with that after the event.
We also have a really good consumer-focused video on this, on the clickable logo, which we can share afterwards. And actually, in developing the logo, we did quite a lot of consumer testing, so it all flows through to make sure it's a really good product, and we're happy to share that.
Thanks very much, Natalie. Thanks very much, Chris. And Paul, who's asked the question, please, by all means, do come back in if you'd like any further information on that. So now I'm going to hand over to Chris Hanford, who's going to talk a little bit about what the future holds. So Chris, I think, will have spoken to many of you at lots of our events. Chris is, of course, our Director of Regulatory Policy, 20 years experience in the legal sector, and prior to joining us, you were Head of Research and Development at the Legal Services Board. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Jane. So what are we looking at next, and what are our areas of future focus? So I think the first thing is, as you've heard from the other speakers, there's lots of positives out there about how people are increasingly looking for and looking at the information around price and service on law firms' websites, and we really appreciate the efforts that you've made to make this information available and easier to find. And some of the real positives around that affordability point. So people are reassured about the affordability of legal services and when they can see how much they cost. So that's really good. And while people do look for competitive pricing and they want a good indication of what services might cost and a bit of certainty around that, we know that people don't go for the cheapest option. Quality is ultimately more important to them. That's the most important thing. So some of the key things and for people to understand, the kind of questions that they ask is, is this the right law firm for me? Are they good at what they do? Is their customer service the right fit for me? And there are indications from our research that people are finding some of the information that they're looking for here, but it's an area where we think probably more can be done to help people choose and to help good firms really stand out. There can be real benefits of having good and accessible quality information to help contextualize the price and service information. So this is something that we're going to be looking at. You'll hear the words quality indicators, which is kind of the word that's bandied around this. It's something that the Competition and Markets Authority are really interested in. As was mentioned earlier, they did this big review in 2016 and made recommendations about the price and service requirements, and also around the need for quality stuff at some point. And they are returning to this and are likely to pick up on this again. And also an area our oversight regulator, the Legal Services Board, are likely to put some emphasis on. They've recently highlighted that in their view, the market impact of the changes have been slow coming through in terms of shopping around, people shopping around, and impacts on price. And they see quality information as part of the key for unlocking that. So what we're doing is we're really looking at doing more work to look at what consumers want and what the best ways are to get this quality information to them. And there are kind of 3 points bulleted on here, and the Legal Services Consumer Panel, who are an independent body that represent the consumer in this sector, they've undertaken some qualitative research, and they've identified these 3 indicators that they think may be useful. So one that's come through our research and was flagged earlier is around this customer feedback. Natalie and Arvinder highlighted that one of the things that people consistently say they want and what they look for is customer reviews. So what are their peers saying about a firm? And there's a small number that have the facility to provide this at the moment or link through to an independent review site. So secondly, specialisms and expertise. So what sort of work does a firm normally do? Who's doing it? And we already require some of this information, of course, around qualification experience of fee earners. And we have guidance out there about what that might mean and how consumers might view that in practice. So we're going to be looking at whether that's giving people what they want and it's a way they can easily find and understand. And then jumping back actually to the top bullet around objective data, is there any other publicly available data out there that may offer indicators around a firm, the quality of a firm that consumers might find interesting? We've seen in other sectors, like the medical sector, there's been a big push at this in recent years. So are there any useful comparisons out there? So we'll be looking at those quality indicators, and we'll also be looking at, and this takes us into questions about how that information is accessible and if there's anything that can be done to kind of improve comparability. Digital comparison tools always come into the debate here. They've been a game changer in some other sectors, but we've seen that usage has been traditionally low in this sector. And of course, there are particular characteristics in this sector, and they're not without their issues. But is there more of a role that they can play here? And we've been talking to some digital comparison tool providers and some independent review sites. They've indicated there's been more interest in their services, partly as a result of COVID, greater interest in digital more generally, and people are potentially becoming less geographically sensitive as well due to the use of more online stuff. Other area to mention is around this consistency of the information that's provided. So we quite deliberately gave sort of broad scope and flexibility about how firms publish their information, and as mentioned, it can be around ranges of prices, etc., etc. One of the areas that I get feedback on a lot and is coming through in some of the commentary around this is whether this allows for an effective comparison, or is there more that could be done around perhaps offering sort of best practice guides, etc., on how to display data in a consistent way. So again, just something that we'll be considering as we move forward. Okay, so what else we'd like to be doing next? So the next slide. So I've mentioned the CMA. They'll be issuing their update in mid-December, looking at the progress of the transparency requirements and how the market responded to that mid-December, and they will have recommendations for regulators. And the LSB will also be looking to issue a policy statement, which will include some guidance for regulators as well. So there is some external factors that we will be monitoring closely and taking into account. And as mentioned, we expect that this will cover quality indicators and possibly comparison tools. So our view is that there's been positive movement in many ways, and it does take time for changes to come through, but we can't rest on our laurels. So first of all, we are a evidence-based regulator, and we really do appreciate there's a cost to the requirements we put in place. So this is why we have undertaken this comprehensive evaluation research that Natalie and Arvinda have been talking about, why we're doing the engagement and the web sweeps that Paul were talking about. And we're going to continue to build on this and really talk to consumers, to the profession, talk to comparison sites, etc., to understand what is working well and where more might be needed. And we've also got a long-term commitment to monitor and evaluate the impacts of what we're doing, and there'll be a kind of fuller evaluation after 3 years as well. So we do think there is merit potentially in piloting some new approaches. One of the questions that we were asked in advance was whether we're going to mandate the use of digital comparison tools. I think my answer to that is that isn't our current thinking, but we are talking to comparison tools and other legal regulators to see if there is more that we can do to trial and test things to see whether there can be more take up and usage of digital comparison tools and review sites. So we may, for example, focus in on a couple of areas of law activities and try to really encourage greater use of online review websites and digital comparison tools. That'll mean really understanding what consumers want, how they work for the profession, and trying to bring that together and to promote something that might really work and be popular. And there are lots of benefits to that approach. So, thinking at the moment, work in progress, but that's the sort of direction we might be heading in there. We are also going to be looking at all of our guidance and templates, looking to refresh what's out there in light of the feedback that we've had, the evaluation we've done, the web sweeps, and lots of other people have been looking at these areas too, and looking at the broad range of evidence as well as what's the CMA come back with. So we'll be looking at doing that and trying to introduce things like real examples of best practice and bring in some of the tips that Paul's been talking about as well. And we'll include with that some refreshing of our guidance that's already out there about how firms can engage and get benefits from engaging with review sites, etc. So the final bullet here is around widening to other areas. So when we introduced these requirements, we deliberately chose a small number of areas of law and activities to introduce prices and service requirements to start with. We wanted to see how they worked, evaluate them a little bit. The CMA's original report recommended that there should be a base level of transparency across all areas. They may well turn to that, and it's something that we'll be keeping an active eye on as well, digging into what's been effective and why, and whether there's a benefit in extending out at all. So that's a kind of a whistle-stop tour through to kind of some things that are on our minds, looking into the future on the back of this evaluation and what's coming forward, and we will continue to engage with the profession as we develop our thinking.
Thanks very much, Chris, and a great whistle-stop tour there of something that's still quite early in the regulatory framework. So I've got some questions coming in, unsurprisingly, around digital comparison tools, really topical. So one of the questions relates to whether we know how many firms are already using digital comparison tools and what sort of thing we think would make it more appealing for firms to use those tools.
Yeah, I mean, our evaluation work picked up that it's a small number of firms that are using comparison tools at the moment. I think Arvinder and Natalie will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that of the sample that we spoke to, there was less than 5%, I think it was around 2% or something, that were using them, and a similar amount that said that they would consider using them in the future. So really low levels and quite a long way to go. So what could we do? I mean, this is why we've been talking to comparison tool providers and talking to firms as well as consumers to try and really understand this more and what the barriers might be, and this will feed into our pilot work. But I mean, first of all, it has to be made easy for firms to use these. They have to be confident that the information that will be there is of good quality. You know, everyone hears horror stories, movies about review farming, etc. So some real kind of reassurance around that, and getting over the fear factor. And I think that's an area where we really can help, working with digital comparison tools, is looking at examples of where people are really using them, benefiting them, making sure that there are controls around reviews, but also the fear factor that actually people, you can engage with reviews as well. The feedback is generally really good. If you get a view that's not so positive, if you think, how am I going to put this right, and then address that in the forum, then that can be really positive too. So lots of stuff that can be done to help people understand the benefits, how they can really use it in a simple way and get confidence in different mechanisms.
Thanks very much, Chris. And you mentioned there the challenge of fake or rogue reviews and how people can manage some of that. And it's one of the areas that I know really concerns people. We've also had a question coming in about whether the digital comparison businesses themselves are driven by kickbacks rather than quality.
Well, there's different models out there. Obviously, the digital comparison tools are businesses, but they have different models. They quite a lot of the ones that are active at the moment are around placing firms with consumers. You'll get quotes and they can be passed on. But what's really important is that the ones we've spoken to, they are clear that they have to be, and we would really require them, if we were to promote it all, to be really transparent about any fees that are being charged and how that works in practice, so people can make those choices with open eyes. And this does happen in other sectors. An area CMA have looked at and offered guidance around that. So there are templates out there and precedents that can be followed too.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. And I'm sure more people will want to dig into that. And I've got a question from someone who I think has been doing exactly that. So they're saying that the LSB report in March of this year seemed to show that quality marks don't affect price, as most people tend to buy based on price. What have the quality marks actually achieved for consumers? So a big question there.
That's a big question, isn't it? Well, I guess the first thing to highlight is, and I think something that we mentioned previously in the presentation, is that actually consumers aren't driven solely by price. They certainly, lots of them certainly, they are interested in it. They want to make sure that the prices are competitive. But actually, it is the experience, the expertise, the quality of the firm that they're really interested in. And in fact, very few people go with the cheapest option available. So it certainly isn't all about price when people make choices. So that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is that if people being able to understand quality and choose on that basis is really important, irrespective of the impact it has on price, I think. So understanding what service they're buying is really important. And it is really important contextual information for the price information that's out there as well. And we're really keen to make sure that in anything that we do going forward, that we really understand what the right quality indicators are that people appreciate and have benefit.
Thanks, Chris. And just to say, we've got some questions coming in around the detail of what people should be publishing and indeed the clickable logo, and I'm going to pick those up in a moment. But while we're looking at the quality indicators, someone's just asked for a bit more detail around the medical profession using quality indicators. Is there anything more to say on that?
It's not something that I am yet an expert in, I'm afraid, but in the discussions that we've been having, this is often flagged as an area where it is used, and particularly in private medical care, actually, where information is put out there around success rates, etc., that is being taken up, but something that we'll be digging into more, but I'm not yet an expert in, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Chris. Perhaps a question for the medical sector, but thank you. It's a really interesting comparator. We've got a question about the sort of information that firms should be publishing on their website, and it's around our hourly rates. Is it enough to publish hourly rates, or should hourly rates of different level of fee earners be published? Who would like to pick that one up?
I can pick that one up if you like, Jane.
Thanks, Natalie.
So what we're really trying to drive at with these rules is to give consumers an idea of what the total cost of the service is going to be. So for that reason, I think if you're using hourly rates, it's also useful to sort of set out the level that the particular fee earner might be. I think also just sort of providing an indication as to how many hours might be needed for that particular type of matter, just to really give people a flavour in advance of what the costs might be at the outset. That's what we're really trying to achieve with these rules. So I would encourage you to sort of think about it in that way.
Thanks, Natalie. That's really helpful, and that's given Joe a minute to ask us another question on digital comparison websites. So we're being asked whether the SRA would guide people towards certain website comparisons to certain website tools. Otherwise, there's a risk that people might not trust the site itself. Chris, is that one that you'd like to pick up? Thanks,
I could
Joe.
say that. Again, I should highlight that we're at the start of this work and talking to comparison tools, etc. So I don't have answers to all of these questions yet. It's an area that we're going to look into, and as I say, working with the comparison tools, but also building on the evidence we've got and speaking more to consumers and profession, etc., to really understand. But we are very conscious that there is concerns out there around the quality of the comparison sites. So it will be in our thinking as we work through kind of what we might want to pilot and the guidance, etc., that we put out there. So it's on our minds, but I don't have an answer yet.
Thanks very much, and clearly something that we need to look at. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Joe. Similar to the or related to the prices question, we've got somebody asking whether it would be okay to use a quote generator on their website. I wonder who would like to pick that one up. Is that one for you, Paul, perhaps, to jump in?
I could take this one if you like, Jane.
Please do.
Yeah, just first and foremost, we think it's a great tool, and obviously consumers find it really helpful. We see this quite a lot on the website. So for anybody who's not sure, the quote generator is a piece of software that you can put on your website that enables you to give automatic quotes based on information that's provided. Our only caveat to that are there are various versions of this, though. So the type that we're interested in is it must be able to produce an immediate quote on the spot. What we don't want is for firms to be calling people back and that sort of thing. Finally, a nice tip in this particular area, some of the research that we've seen suggests that consumers are more inclined to interact with some of the software where they are required to produce less personal information. So it's just something to bear in mind if you're thinking about using a quote generator.
Thanks very much, Paul. And did you get a feel for whether many firms were using a generator?
Yeah, I think so. The quote generators that we've been seeing during the web sweeps were largely being used by conveyancing firms. And as I said, we did genuinely think they were really good and straightforward tools that were able to provide a good degree of information to people that were requesting it.
Thanks, Paul. That's helpful to understand, and I hope that answers that question. We've got another question on the detail of what people can pick up directly on the website, which is around what complaints information people need to actually put up on their website and whether there's any particular wording around that. Perhaps I could go to you, Paul, on that one first.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So the complaints information is really straightforward. What we're looking to see is a copy of the firm's complaint policy and then how and when they can contact Leo. So again, coming back to that idea that make sure you do mention that it's within 6 years, and then also when they can contact the SRA. As I think the question is already hinting at, we have actually produced guidance in this area where we've produced some specific wording. So if you are interested in this, have a look on our website and you can literally copy and paste it into any of your own documents.
Thanks very much, Paul. Did someone else want to come in on this one? Publication of complaints data, I think we've picked that up. Brand, thank you very much. We've got a follow-up question on the financials, so on to a better description. So we're being asked, why is there a focus on price comparison websites when consumers don't really choose based on price? And perhaps that picks up again the earlier question about the findings of the LSB research earlier this year. So Chris, as you covered that one, would you like to pick this one up too?
So I mean, I think what I was trying to get across earlier is that the price isn't the most important thing. There's reputation and quality, but price is still a key factor for people, and that is important. And what we are looking at as well is around what the full picture of information that people want to be able to make really good choices are. So price, service, what else on quality altogether, and what we've seen, as I said, is really good progress in the market or in what firms are doing, certainly since we introduced these requirements. But they're still, the shopping around levels are still reasonably low, and comparison sites are one way that you might be able to get that sort of greater comparability, which might help.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thank you. And we've got a couple more questions on the pricing point. So someone's come back in and said, can quote generators require personal contact details in order for them to work? Paul, I think this is one for you.
Hi, yeah. I'm not entirely sure of the answer about this. Is there anybody else on the panel who could assist?
Yeah, I can help with this one. So I think as long as if you're using a quote generator and you're compliant with the associated data protection legislation when handling data from consumers, there's nothing to sort of prevent you from handling that data at all. But it's just making sure that you're sort of following the data protection side.
Thank you very much, Natalie. That's helpful. Thank you. And thank you, Paul. We've got a question around enforcement being focused on firms providing price transparency information online. How does the SRA regulate firms who say they are providing cost information in writing?
Yeah, I can take that one if you like, Jane.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, so I think that's a fair point. And so far, I think the discussion today has been focused on our proactive work that we're carrying around on firm websites. But obviously, it's not the only way we receive information. So we still get complaints from consumers and solicitors. So if we do get something in, that is an area that we're still interested in, and we will engage with firms and take further action where necessary. But I guess in addition, what we should remember as well is that the evaluation did touch on this, and it showed that the clients can and do request information, and it is provided, and there's quite a good level of satisfaction from clients. So there's a positive point there too.
Thanks very much, Paul. Thank you. And we've got a follow-up question around accreditation schemes for comparison websites. And Chris has covered some of that already, but particularly picking up the Ofgem and Ofcom, some of the big systems regulators already have that in place. Is that something that we should be considering, Chris?
Yeah, and certainly as we go forward and look at this more, then we'll be looking at all different sectors and all stakeholders that we can kind of nick good ideas on or learn from. So yes, we will be looking at what others do in these sectors and whether there's benefits or anything that could be useful and can transfer across to our sector.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thank you. I'm going to come back now to a question we were asked earlier about the clickable logo. So we're being asked, is it okay to use the logo on more than one website? And of course, lots of firms run several websites. So I'm going to ask you to start us off on that one, Natalie.
Yes, that's fine. So I would say absolutely yes. I think if you do have more than one website and it's possible for a consumer to click through to one and perhaps not know of the existence of the other, then it's definitely good practice to have the logo on each site, so that if consumers want information about protections, they're able to sort of click right through very easily. I would just flag that you would need to register both domains with us, and that can take about 10 days for us to be able to verify the information. So it's not something that you'd be able to do immediately. But it is something that we can certainly work with you to achieve.
That's great. Thanks very much, Natalie. Hopefully that's been helpful for people with more than one website and looking to make sure that that's there. I've got a really general question here, and I think we've touched on a couple of areas, but it would be good to go around the panel and just get a feel for it. So when we undertook the evaluation of what firms are currently publishing, what do you think the big differences were from what we saw before the rules came in to what's happening now? And perhaps I could start with, I was going to say Arvinder, but it looks as though you're diving in there, Chris. Do you want to keep going?
I was just going to say one of the biggest things is that firms are publishing information now. So I think that when we or the research beforehand showed that only about 18% of firms had price information on their websites. And if you look at the picture now and some of the figures that Arvinder and Natalie were talking about earlier, we have seen quite a lot of progress. And it's great to see that people who look at that information are saying that they find it really, really useful. So I mean, that's the most obvious thing, is that the information's there and people are finding it useful.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thank you. So that's got to be right. Looking at some of the detail in that, Arvinder, did you have a view on what you'd seen that you thought had really come a distance?
Yes, definitely. So before we did this first year evaluation, we did actually do some baseline research as well, and pretty much the figures that Chris has outlined. It's just the change, and it's actually quite early days for the transparency rules, relatively, and we've seen a great shift in the amount of information and the number of firms providing that information. So it's really great to see that, and more importantly, it's what consumers are finding really useful as well.
Thanks, Arvinder. How about you, Natalie? Did anything jump out at you?
I think one of the one of the things that we were talking about earlier on was around perceptions of whether or not firms are regulated. And I think there is still a bit of a way to go on that. But I do think there has been encouraging trends that are coming through on that. So increasingly people are being able to distinguish the regulated from unregulated. And part of that is through the reforms that we have been putting in place, things like the clickable logo, the requirements to sort of set out the information about the firm in advance is helping with that. So I do think that there are encouraging, it's moving in an encouraging direction, but I think still we need to do a little bit more on that.
Thanks very much, Natalie. Anything you'd like to add to this one, Paul?
Hi.
Hello, Paul.
Yeah, just a quick one, really. I think it's interesting when you actually look at the websites sitting alongside one another. I think there's still a bit of a clear distinction between the firms that are providing all of the information and meeting their regulatory requirements. And in addition, firms that have gone a little bit further and actually turned it into a good idea just simply for their businesses. And what you can see actually is that information that is provided, that it's clear and it's transparent and it's in an easy to find space, it's just so much better and so much easier to find that information that I do think it's probably having an impact on how many clients are willing to go through.
Thanks, Paul. And just to comment that I'm conscious that from when we started this conversation off a few years ago now, there were already significant numbers of the firms who were publishing lots of information out there. And in a way, by introducing the rules, we're giving everyone else an opportunity to learn from their experience. But I think we are seeing firms who are taking this type of approach much more widely than the common services that we've put in place within our rules, and indeed some of the suggestions we've made that we're asking you to use, and putting much more information out there. So it'll be interesting to see as we look at this further what difference that's making. I've got a couple of questions in that are quite detailed and technical in terms of some precise work that individual firms are doing. And I'd like to flag that I don't think we've got time to take those now, but on Paul's slide that he showed earlier, he gave you an email address. And can I suggest that for those detailed technical questions, could you send them in and then we can get back on the detail of that to you directly? And we've just got time for one final question. So one of the things that we've also been talking to you about, and we pick up at the compliance conferences, is what more consumer information, consumer resources confirms point to. And we've got a question around the Legal Choices website. And I know a lot of firms who come to compliance conference have linked to this. So they're asking us whether we got any information from the evaluation about how people are using Legal Choices. And I think that's one for our evaluation guru. That's you, Arvinda.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, as many of the profession know, the Legal Choices is a consumer-facing website, and it provides information to consumers to help them navigate the legal services market. So, and we run it on behalf of most of the other regulators, and we've been working to develop the website over the past 3 years. You may also know that it was put in place in response to some of the wider recommendations of the CMA review in 2016. So just coming back to the question, from our research, we found that it's really encouraging, really positive findings, that many individual consumers and half of the small businesses we engaged with were actually aware of Legal Choices, and there's lots of useful information on that. So that's all sort of moving in the right direction.
Thanks very much, Arvinda. So more to do there, but it's a really useful objective resource, and it's a good one to put up on the websites. It helps people have a look around and understand the legal sector, and of course gives them information about the benefits of using a regulated legal services provider. So some really helpful stuff for firms there as well. We're really running out of time here now, I'm afraid. So I'm going to bring our session to a close. And of course, thank all our panel. Thank you, Chris, Natalie, Arvinda and Paul. If we could clap virtually, I'd be asking you all to clap virtually. But a really, really useful session. Thank you. This is the last session of our virtual conference. Running our conference virtually, of course, is something that we had to do like everybody else as part of the adapting to the circumstances in which we all find ourselves. But it's worked really well. And we've already had around 15,000 views of the sessions that we've been running this week. And of course, one of the things that we're doing is making all of that available so people can go back and look at anything that we've said in any of the sessions at another time. So probably expect those numbers to go up. We traditionally web stream parts of Compliance Conference, but this of course has been the entirety. There's a link in the description box that you can see on the evaluation asking you what you thought of this session. Please do complete that as it helps us to plan for the future. And we're going to be sending out a full evaluation survey to everyone who registered, and that will be coming out on Monday. And again, I'd be very grateful if you could fill that in, because it helps us provide more of this kind of resource for you as compliance officers in the future. Finally, thank you all for the great questions. Please do keep in touch. We provided you some contact details there, and use all those resources that we're providing to help with publishing more and better information. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Have a good Friday.